Daniel Parker had always been a man who clung to routine. The evenings in his quiet suburban home unfolded the same way each day: lights dimmed at 10, a glass of water on the nightstand, and the soft hum of his husband Michael Reed's steady breathing filling the silence beside him. Yet on this particular night, that silence was broken, not by Michael, but by the arrival of someone else whose presence unsettled every part of Daniel's carefully constructed life. Ethan Ward had been staying with them for less than a week, and already Daniel felt the house itself had changed. He was Michael's nephew, a young man in his early 20s, sent to live with them temporarily while searching for work in the city. From the moment Daniel met him, something about Ethan had felt off balance, like a door left ajar in a storm. He wasn't loud or disruptive, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a confidence too old for his years, that seemed to cut through Daniel's composure. The first evening, Ethan had sat across from him at the dinner table, speaking casually about his college life, his plans, his struggles. Daniel had listened politely, yet his mind had caught on Ethan's smile, too knowing, too direct. He dismissed it at the time as a projection, the foolish imagination of a man weary of monotony. But the days that followed proved otherwise. Ethan watched him, not carelessly but with intent, and each glance felt like the touch of a hand that had not yet made contact. Michael remained unaware. He was absorbed in his own distractions: long hours at work, phone calls that stretched into the night, conversations that felt half-finished when they spoke. Daniel had grown used to that distance, the way his marriage had shifted from intimacy to something more like companionship. There was love, yes, but muted, dulled by time. The quiet spaces between them had become heavy, and into that silence Ethan had stepped. Daniel told himself it was nothing, a passing curiosity. Still, he noticed things he shouldn't have: the way Ethan's shirt clung to his shoulders when he returned from a run, the sound of his laugh echoing down the hallway, the faint trace of cologne that lingered when he passed too close. These were not things an uncle-in-law should notice, yet Daniel did, and each realization tied a knot tighter inside his chest. One night, Daniel found himself awake while the rest of the house slept. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, aware of Michael's form beside him, turned away as usual. Sleep would not come. Something in the air felt restless, charged, as if the house itself held its breath. He rose quietly, stepping into the dim hallway. The clock read just past midnight. At the end of the corridor, Ethan's door stood slightly open. A sliver of light leaked into the darkened hall. Daniel paused, unsure why he was even standing there. He told himself it was concern, that perhaps Ethan had left the lamp on by mistake, but even that felt like a weak excuse. He hesitated, heart thudding, before turning back toward his own room. "Can't sleep?" Ethan's voice came, low and steady, stopping him in his tracks. Daniel turned, startled, to find Ethan leaning against the doorframe. His hair was tousled, his eyes clear, as if he had been waiting. He wore only a plain t-shirt and shorts, casual but enough to make Daniel suddenly aware of his own body, of the robe barely tied around his waist. "No," Daniel stammered, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Just restless." Ethan's smile flickered, not mocking but knowing. "Me too. Nights in this house feel heavier than the days." The remark was odd, but Daniel couldn't deny its truth. Something about the silence of night made everything sharper: the distance with Michael, the closeness of Ethan, the sense that boundaries were thinner here. He nodded faintly, unable to muster a response that wouldn't betray what churned inside him. Ethan tilted his head, studying him with that same unnerving attentiveness. "You don't look like a man who rests easy, Daniel." The use of his name caught him off guard. Michael rarely said it anymore, preferring affectionate shorthand or nothing at all. Hearing it spoken so directly, with weight, felt startlingly intimate. Daniel swallowed hard, stepping back slightly, as though the space between them had grown dangerous. "It's late," he said quietly, retreating toward his own door. "You should get some sleep." "Maybe later," Ethan replied, his voice carrying the faintest edge of mischief. He didn't move, didn't close the door, only watched as Daniel disappeared into the dark. Back in bed, Daniel lay rigid, staring at the ceiling once more. Michael remained sound asleep, his breathing steady and oblivious. Daniel's own pulse, however, raced with a rhythm he could not calm. Ethan's words echoed in his head, each syllable like a stone dropped into still water. "You don't look like a man who rests easy." For the first time in years, Daniel admitted to himself that he didn't. Rest had become a fragile thing, slipping further from reach with every glance, every word, every quiet intrusion from the young man down the hall. He closed his eyes, but rest would not come, not while Ethan lingered so close, waiting, and though he told himself this was the end of it, that he would draw a line and hold it firm, deep down Daniel knew the night had only just begun. Daniel lay awake long after Michael had drifted into the deep, steady rhythm of sleep. The weight of the blanket pressed against him, but it offered no comfort. His mind would not quiet, circling back again and again to the image of Ethan in the doorway, barely lit by the thin glow of the lamp, his words lingering in the air like smoke. "You don't look like a man who rests easy," the thought gnawed at him, and soon even the walls of his bedroom felt confining. Daniel rose once more, padding softly through the hallway, telling himself he only needed water, nothing more. Yet when he reached the kitchen, he found Ethan already there, leaning against the counter with a glass in hand, as though he had expected this meeting. "You move quietly for someone who can't sleep," Ethan said, his voice low, casual, almost amused. Daniel froze in the doorway, caught between irritation and unease. "And you stay up late for someone who's supposed to be resting?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I'm waiting for company." The remark landed too directly, and Daniel felt the shift in the air, the charged pause that followed. He moved past Ethan to the sink, filling his glass slowly, focusing on the sound of running water to steady himself. But Ethan did not step away. He lingered, close enough that Daniel could sense his presence without looking. "You don't talk much at dinner," Ethan continued, his tone more probing now. "Michael does most of the talking, but you," he paused, letting the silence stretch, "you sit there like you've got something to hide." Daniel set the glass down harder than intended, the sharp clink of glass on stone breaking the quiet. "Careful with assumptions," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed more strain than authority. Ethan's eyes held his, unwavering. "It's not an assumption if I can see it. You don't belong in that silence." The word struck Daniel with uncomfortable precision. He wanted to deny it, to turn the conversation into something ordinary, but the sincerity in Ethan's gaze made denial feel impossible. His throat tightened as he realized how easily this young man, barely out of boyhood, had unraveled him in a matter of days. The tension hung there, unspoken yet undeniable. Daniel tried to retreat, but Ethan's hand brushed lightly against his arm as he moved past. The touch was fleeting, accidental by appearance, but deliberate in weight. Daniel stiffened, heart racing, as if the entire house might awaken from that single contact. "You should go back to bed," Daniel whispered, his voice more fragile than commanding. "Maybe I will," Ethan said, stepping closer, his expression unreadable. "But I wonder if you will." Daniel didn't answer. He walked away, retreating to his bedroom as though the distance could dissolve what had just happened. Sliding back under the covers beside Michael, he forced his breathing into an even rhythm, pretending to sleep. Yet every nerve remained awake, alive, burning with the memory of that near touch. The following days blurred with subtle escalations. Ethan's presence filled the house, not with noise but with a quiet insistence. He seemed to appear where Daniel was, lingering in the kitchen when Daniel made coffee, crossing paths in the hallway, leaning against the porch railing at night when Daniel sought fresh air. Always calm, always too composed, and always watching. Daniel tried to ground himself in routine, in Michael's company, but the gap between them yawned wider. Michael spoke of work, of projects, of meetings, his words functional, clipped. Daniel responded dutifully, but his mind drifted elsewhere, to Ethan's silent provocations. The guilt grew heavier, even before any true betrayal had taken place. One evening, while Michael stayed late at the office, Daniel found himself in the living room, the television flickering without his attention. Ethan entered quietly and dropped onto the couch beside him, uninvited but not unwelcome. The proximity was unbearable, too close, too deliberate. "You're restless again," Ethan observed. Daniel's jaw tightened. You shouldn't keep saying that. Why not? It's true. The defiance in Ethan's tone stirred something dangerous in Daniel, a mixture of anger and longing. He turned to face him, ready to issue a warning, but the words faltered when he saw Ethan's expression, not mocking, not juvenile, but steady, certain. You don't have to keep pretending, Daniel, Ethan said softly. Not with me. The sentence carried a weight Daniel could not deflect. He felt stripped bare, every defense eroded by the simple certainty in Ethan's voice. His pulse thundered in his ears, louder than the television, louder than reason itself. You should be careful, Daniel managed, his voice unsteady. Maybe, Ethan replied, leaning back, stretching with casual ease. But then again, maybe careful is exactly what keeps you miserable. The statement lodged itself deep inside Daniel, unshakable. For years he had lived carefully, every decision weighed, every emotion buried. Care had become a prison, one Ethan had exposed with effortless clarity. The night grew later, and eventually Ethan rose, brushing close as he left the room. Good night, Daniel, he said, the syllables lingering like a touch. Daniel remained on the couch long after, staring at the darkened screen, his chest tight with contradictions. Desire pulled against duty, and guilt already pressed against him, though no lines had been crossed. Or had they? In thought, in intent, perhaps the betrayal had already begun. When he finally returned to bed, Michael stirred slightly, murmuring something incoherent before settling again. Daniel lay still, staring into the darkness, haunted by the truth Ethan had forced him to face. He was restless. He was unsatisfied. And he was dangerously close to giving in. As the hours passed and sleep refused to come, Daniel knew the night would not release him so easily. Ethan's presence was no longer just an intrusion, it was a storm building within the walls of the house, and Daniel was already caught in its pull. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him, and he realized with sudden clarity, the line he swore he would never cross had begun to blur. Daniel woke with a start, his heart hammering as if he had been running. Morning light filtered faintly through the blinds, casting stripes of gold across the room. Michael still slept beside him, one arm draped lazily across the sheets, breathing deep and untroubled. Daniel envied that calm. For him, rest had been impossible. The night had been fractured, haunted by Ethan's voice, Ethan's nearness, the electric weight of temptation he had not shaken. Sliding out of bed carefully so as not to disturb Michael, Daniel padded down the hall. The air smelled faintly of coffee. Ethan was already in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug in hand. He greeted Daniel with a look that was more intimate than any spoken word. Morning, Ethan said, his tone warm but edged with something unspoken. Daniel nodded, avoiding his eyes, though the avoidance felt futile. Every movement in the room seemed magnified, the scrape of the chair, the clink of ceramic against wood, the subtle rhythm of their breathing. He wanted to say something ordinary, to dissolve the tension into nothing, but his mouth was dry, his thoughts tangled. Michael entered minutes later, cheerful in his distracted way. He kissed Daniel's cheek absently, muttered something about a meeting, and grabbed his bag before leaving the house. The door closed with a heavy finality, leaving silence in its wake. Daniel felt the shift immediately, the absence of his husband like a signal neither he nor Ethan could ignore. Ethan set down his mug and leaned back, arms crossed, eyes locked on Daniel. You're not going to keep running forever, he said quietly. Daniel stiffened. This, whatever you think this is, it can't happen. Can't? Ethan stepped closer, his voice low, persuasive. Or won't? The distinction pierced Daniel more than he wanted to admit. He pushed back his chair, as though distance could build a wall strong enough to protect him. But Ethan followed, measured in his pace, giving Daniel no room to retreat. You've been restless for years, Ethan murmured. I see it. You hide it from Michael, but you can't hide it from me. Not anymore. The truth of the words hit harder than the closeness itself. Daniel's breath faltered. His marriage had become a series of polite gestures, a partnership more than a passion. He had told himself it was enough, that this was simply what time did to love. But Ethan's presence had torn that justification apart. Ethan, Daniel's voice cracked. He wanted to tell him to stop, to end this before it crossed into unforgivable territory, but what came out instead was weaker, betraying the longing he had buried too long, and then the line was crossed. Not in a rush of recklessness, but in a quiet inevitability, as though both men had known all along this moment would arrive. The silence of the house enclosed them, heavy with secrecy. Afterward, Daniel sat alone in the living room, head in his hands, pulse erratic. Ethan had disappeared into his room, leaving Daniel with nothing but the echo of what had transpired. The weight of guilt settled immediately, pressing against his chest like stone. Michael's face rose unbidden in his mind, his trust, his familiarity, his years of devotion. Daniel felt sick, yet beneath the guilt simmered something he could not dismiss. He felt alive. When Michael returned later, Daniel forced himself into composure. He asked about the meeting, nodded at the replies, smiled at the right moments. Ethan played his part as well, casual and unbothered, slipping into conversation with ease. But Daniel's mind screamed beneath the surface, each glance a reminder of what had been done. The following days stretched into a haze of secrecy. Daniel tried to avoid Ethan, to erect barriers of distance, but Ethan's calm confidence eroded every effort. Worse still, Michael began noticing things, small, almost imperceptible shifts. Daniel's distracted responses, his lingering silences, his inability to meet his husband's gaze without guilt. Michael asked once if everything was all right. Daniel forced a smile and said yes, hating how hollow the lie felt on his tongue. Suspense thickened with every passing hour. One evening, Michael walked into the room just as Ethan's hand brushed Daniel's shoulder in a fleeting, wordless gesture. The moment was innocent by appearance, yet Daniel's body froze in terror. Michael looked between them for a beat too long, then turned away, saying nothing. But Daniel could feel the unasked question hanging in the air, heavier than any accusation. That night, lying beside Michael, Daniel stared into the darkness, unable to breathe evenly. Every sound from the hall felt like the echo of guilt. Every shift in Michael's sleep carried the threat of discovery. He whispered to himself in the dark, promising it would not happen again. He repeated the vow as though repetition could make it true, yet deep down, beneath the layers of remorse and fear, he knew the truth. The door had already been opened, and some part of him did not want to close it. The story of that night, the night Ethan would not let him rest, had only begun its ripple. Daniel felt the tide pulling him further, even as he clung desperately to the shore of his marriage. The secrecy, the danger, the impossible mixture of guilt and longing, it all pressed forward with unstoppable force, and as sleep finally came in fitful fragments, one thought lingered louder than the rest: what had begun in silence would not remain hidden forever.